Hello, everyone. Welcome back. All right, so we're going to pick up with chapter/module 3, Biopsychology. So here we're going to look a little bit into the neuropsychology, how the brain works and how it sends messages along pathways. So biopsychology explores the biological mechanisms that underlie behavior. Among many things it studies is genetic, the structure and function of the nervous system, and how the nervous system interacts with the endocrine system. So human genetics. Um, Human researchers are very interested in why two people who are, for example, infected with the same disease may react differently to it. For example, someone that has cancer, some form of cancer, may react differently than someone else with the same type of cancer, or may handle it a little bit differently. Um, what are some of the genetic components to psychological disorders such as depression? And how are genetic diseases passed on through family lines? Right? So, not all diseases are genetic, but let's look at some here in the future that are. Okay, so the theory of evolution. Charles Darwin, you've likely heard this name before, explored the concept of inheritance of traits throughout generations. He noted that organisms are better suited for their environment. Organisms that are better suited for their environment will survive and reproduce, while those that are poorly suited for their environment will die off. Okay, so there are a couple of different characteristics that are listed there that he made note of to help in the success of survival through the theory of evolution. So down here at the bottom, he quoted, "It is not the strongest of species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change." So here we look at Charles Darwin just a little bit further. In 1859, he proposed the theory of evolution and wrote a book on the origin of species you have likely heard of before. All right, so why do certain genetic diseases that cause people to die not become less common? A lot of times they become adaptable, like we talked about. And for example, here you see some information about sickle cell anemia. So read through that. That will give you a little bit of an idea as to how it doesn't necessarily, the disease does not go away, but people become more. All right, so with genetic variation, you have an egg that contains 23 chromosomes that is fertilized by a sperm containing 23 chromosomes. This creates what we call DNA, which is a helix-shaped molecule made of nucleotide base pairs. And so each chromosome sequences of a DNA make up the genes. Right? A gene is a sequence of DNA that controls or partially controls physical characteristics known as traits, so eye color, hair color, and therefore anything that has to do that makes you who you are. A gene may have multiple possible variations of alleles, a specific version of a gene. Right? And you'll hear that term a little bit more. A genotype versus a phenotype. A genotype refers to the genetic makeup of an individual through genetic material, so DNA, what's inherited from their parents. A phenotype describes an individual's observable characteristics, such as hair color, height, build, those types of things. All right, we have dominant versus recessive alleles. So we have the majority of inheritable traits are controlled by more than just one gene, and in such cases, they are known as polygenetic traits. All right, so here we have heterozygous and homozygous. The two main important things to remember between those two is heterozygous is consisting of two different alleles, all right, so two things that are opposites, and homozygous is consisting of two identical, all right. So up at the top, it gives you an example So you have dominant or recessive. So you have a dominant allele, which is a capital A for the flower color purple. Um, and the lowercase a is a recessive allele for the flower color, which is white. So those are two different things that makes up the heterozygous. All right. Homozygous, they would have both of those would be either the capital or the lowercase. So here you have possession of a dominant allele with always result in expression of the phenotype. This can be inherited from one parent, which would be, once again, like that heterozygous with the capital A and the lowercase a, or both parents, which would be homozygous with both capital A's. All right, so if you were a researcher, you would use a Punnett square to try to figure this out. All right, so is there going to be an inheritable trait for a particular child based on the genetic makeup of its parents? Okay. So Punnett squares, once again, you'll see here where there are some of those um, genes and traits that we talked about previously. Here, just with different alphabetical symbols here. So sometimes you have mutations, so a certain sudden permanent change in a gene. Many mutations are harmful, but some can also be beneficial. Okay, so this may be where there wasn't a dominant gene for cancer, but yet a child ends up with cancer. So gene-environment interactions. Nature and nurture work together like complex pieces of a human puzzle. The interaction of our environment and genes makes us the individuals we are. Okay, so there are many different ways to look at this interaction. We have range of reaction. We have genetic environmental correlation, so the view of the gene-environment interaction that asserts our genes and how that affects our environment. Our environment influences the expression of our genes. And then we have epigenetics, which is the study of the gene-environment interactions. All right, so we have neuron structure here. The function of a neuron is aided by specific aspects of its structure. It is semi-permeable membrane, allows smaller molecules or molecules without an electrical charge to pass through it, while stopping larger or highly charged molecules. Incoming electrical signals from other neurons are received by the dendrites, which then send the signal down the axon. So let's look at what this looks like. All right, so here you have our cell body, which is called the soma. You have these dendrites that connect to other dendrites. You have the cell membrane. You have the axon. You have these terminal buttons here. Okay, and then you have this myelin sheath that kind of protects everything here. All right. Oftentimes, people that have some type of a neurological type of disorder, for example, the one I'm most familiar with is MS. This myelin sheath starts to disappear on certain neurons. And when that happens, it leaves it vulnerable to kind of shut down in different ways. So that there causes a little bit of a problem, like I said, for people that have some type of neurological disorder or disease. Okay, so essentially you have millions and millions of these in up there in your brain, and they are constantly firing off and sending messages. And like I said, they're attached to one another. You can see here where this all attaches, even though it's lighter. It's showing you a demonstration of how that would attach onto the next one. Okay. Here you have the synapses. This is what's going to create that electrical charge between from one neuron to the next. Okay, so here, if there's not a connection that's taking place, there's a lapse of something that's missing there. Something's not firing off correctly. All right, so here you have a resting potential. And a lot of this, if this starts to make you panic a little bit, don't panic, all right? I've added in some videos that will help explain this, almost in a cartoonish kind of breakdown. That's really helpful, okay? Moving through some of my classes, we've kind of talked about it as though if you think about a cannon firing off, you light it, it takes off, and it shoots out the cannonball the way that it needs to. All right. And if something's missing, then it won't fire. Okay. And that's what the action potential is. We'll get to that here in just a minute. So you have this resting potential. It's getting ready to fire. The connections are making there the way that they need to. The action potential is going to be the actual firing. So is the information that's being sent to this neuron going to be able to further on, or is it going to be stopped where it is with that neuron? Okay, so neurotransmitters from nearby neurons attached to receptors are on dendrites, causing the membrane potential to change. Okay, so we have depolarization, where the membrane potential becomes less negative, making the neuron more likely to fire. Okay. We have hyperpolarization, where the membrane potential becomes more negative, making the neuron less likely to fire. Okay. If the level of charge reaches the threshold of excitation, an action potential occurs. Ion channels open, causing an Na positive to rush into the cell and the inside to momentarily become more positive. Okay, so like I said, in order for this action potential to fire, it has to have everything that's set up to help it to go that way. One of the videos kind of mentions an electrical process. If you think about turning on and turning off the lights. If there's a good connection there, you turn on the lights and they come on. If there's a bad connection, something that is stopping that connection from happening, the lights won't come on when you flip the switch. Okay, so just keep that in mind when you're going through how these neurons work and trying to reach that action potential. All right, so here's just a graph of what an action potential looks like and the electrical charge that's taking place. All right, reuptake is whether or not it's going to go on to the next one and continue on this path, this journey of being able to go through a series of action potentials. Okay. Neurotransmitter is a chemical messenger of the nervous system. Different neurons release different types of neurotransmitters that have many different functions. Right? Biological perspective, view that biological disorders like depression and schizophrenia are associated with imbalances in one or more neurotransmitter systems. Okay, so here you have a list of different things all the way down to dopamine, what helps you to sleep, helps your mood and learning, norepinephrine, which helps your heart, your intestines, your alertness, serotonin, once again, rolls back into mood and sleep. If there's something that's missing within those neurotransmitters, it's going to affect those parts of the individual's livelihood. So drugs. Where can drugs be good and where can they be bad? All right, so we've seen a lot of information, especially on various different drugs that have come out, whether it be diabetic drugs, weight loss drugs, COVID-19 drugs to help with COVID-19, those types of things. All right, so psychotropic medication is drugs that treat psychiatric symptoms by restoring neurotransmitter balance. Okay, so if someone does have schizophrenia or depression, a great deal of depression, those types of things, they would have these psychotropic medications in an attempt to help balance out whatever's missing within those neurotransmitters. An agonist is a drug that mimics or strengthens the effects of the neurotransmitter, and an antagonist is a drug that blocks or impedes the normal activity of a given neurotransmitter. Okay, so maybe something is overstimulated by way of the neurotransmitter. Okay, it might require an antagonist rather than an agonist, which would replace it. Agonist-antagonist drugs are prescribed to correct neurotransmitter imbalances. So for an example here, it gives you Parkinson's disease is associated with low levels of dopamine. Dopamine agonists are often prescribed as one of the forms of treatment. Schizophrenia, on the other hand, is associated with too much dopamine. So many antipsychotic drugs are therefore dopamine antagonists. Okay, so keep those two things separate. Okay, an agonist is set up to mimic, so replace something. An antagonist is there to kind of reduce something because it's overproducing. Okay. Parts of the nervous system. So here you have two major parts of the nervous system. And once again, I have a video that I have linked up here for you for this particular chapter to help you with this. This will be important moving into sensation and perception, which is chapter 5, which we will be going over this week as well. Okay, so here you have the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Okay, both are very important. Okay, so the peripheral nervous system is broken down into two different parts. You have the somatic nervous system, which relays sensory and motor information to and from the central nervous system. When you see CNS, that's abbreviation for central nervous system. The autonomic nervous system, sorry about that, controls our internal organs and glands and can be divided into the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. Okay, so you will probably be able to more so relate to these lower branches of the nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is involved in stress-related activities and functions, so prepares us for fight or flight. Okay, the fight or flight response you've likely heard of is an activation of the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system, allowing access to energy reserves and heightened sensory capacity so that we might fight off a given threat or run away safely. Right? If you're being chased by a dog, a strange dog, you don't know what to do, you have that fight or flight response that kicks in. Your body goes into overdrive to protect you to get away from that situation. The parasympathetic nervous system is associated with routine day-to-day operations of the body under relaxed conditions. So rest and restore response, okay, that's your body's trying to cope back through. Rest, bring your blood pressure down, and take you back to where you need to be for your body to function the way that it should, okay, and not remain in that high state of stress. I've attached, it's not going to be on the slides that you have if you download just the slides, but this video that will help you understand the nervous system is linked up underneath here as well. So it'll be in with this chapter. All right, so here's the subdivisions of the nervous system. Okay, and like I said, most everything is abbreviated, so don't let that confuse you. All right, we have the central nervous system, which is known as CNS. That's the brain and your spinal cord. Right? Then we have the peripheral nervous system, which is also sometimes called the PNS. All right, so the nerves to and from the CNS, which is our brain and spinal cord. All right. Off of the peripheral system, we have the autonomic and the somatic. And then off of the autonomic, we have sympathetic and parasympathetic. Okay, so I really like how this slide breaks it down for you and gives you an example because it can be a little overwhelming to some. So make note of this chart to help you in kind of placing what's taking place and where, why. Right. All right. So the autonomic nervous system, here we have the parasympathetic part of the nervous system and the sympathetic part of the nervous system. Okay, so Parasympathetic is going to do one thing while sympathetic is going to do something different or opposing. Okay, so parasympathetic will constrict the pupil while sympathetic dilates the pupil, right? The parasympathetic stimulates when you salivate, and the sympathetic inhibits that. Okay, parasympathetic slows the heart rate. Sympathetic increases the heart rate. Right? Okay, so break that down, kind of look at how that's working and the differences between those two. Like I said, the last slide is a great one to help you just place everything. And you can break things down even further if you'd like into more of a chart as to how the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems work. All right, so the brain and the spinal cord. The brain is comprised of billions of interconnected neurons and glia. It is bilateral, two-sided. So you've likely heard, and we'll talk a little bit more about left brain, right brain. Can be separated into two distinct lobes, but all areas interact with one another. And then we have the spinal cord. Delivers messages to and from the brain. Has its own system of reflexes. Okay, and we'll look at this. So if you're going to touch something that's hot and you immediately pull away, that's your spinal cord that's going into action to help with your nervous system. The top merges with the brainstem and the bottom ends just below the ribs. Functionally organized into 30 segments, each connected to a specific part of the body through the peripheral nervous system. Sensory nerves bring messages in and up to the brain. Motor nerves send messages out to the muscles and organs. Okay, so like I said, this is what's part of helping you to have those quick reactions. Okay, you reach for something that's hot, you might touch it, it's an automatic signal that is letting your body know, hey, that's hot, I don't need to touch that. All right, so here let's look at the two hemispheres of the brain. All right, we have lateralization, the concept that each hemisphere of the brain is associated with specialized functions. So you have the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body, and the right hemisphere controls the left side of the body. Okay, so just try to keep that in order for you in your brain itself. Okay, so here you have the corpus callosum, and here you have a little bit of a breakdown as to what the brain would look like if you were looking at it from a front view and a side view. Okay. You also have here a dissected brain. So this is an actual image of a brain that you're looking at and what this would look like if you were looking at your own brain or someone else's brain in person. All right. Now, this one here is a sheep brain. All right, it's not a human brain, but it's very, very similar in the way that it's going to sit out. All right, we have the forebrain, we have the midbrain, and we have the hindbrain. Okay, so the brain is divided into these three main parts. The forebrain structures, the forebrain is the largest part of the brain. It contains the cerebral cortex, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the limbic system. The cerebral cortex lobes of the brain. So here you have the frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, and the occipital lobe. These are for all of the capabilities that you have, mental capabilities such as consciousness, thought, emotion, reasoning, language, and memory. Right? Okay, so the frontal lobe is involved in executive functioning. So planning, organization, judgment, attention, reasoning, motor control, emotion, and language. So that frontal lobe really controls a lot. Just to give you an example of this, The prefrontal cortex, which is at the very front of your brain, is not completely developed until you're into your upper 20s. All right, so if you are a younger person and your insurance is really high, it's because of this. They know that your decision making and your judgment is not completely developed there. So that's why insurance rates are so high for those that are under the age of 25. All right. So, like I said, it does play an integral part in your judgment, your attention, your reasoning, all those things that just come with more development and more experience. All right, so here you have your motor cortex, your prefrontal cortex, which is what I just talked about, and your Broca's area. In class, we talked a little bit about the frontal lobe with Phineas Gage. I told the story of Phineas Gage. If you have never heard the story of Phineas Gage, look it up. There is a reenactment video of Phineas Gage and what happened to him. He actually was working on a railroad and had a railroad tie that projected through his skull and actually took out a part of his brain. He survived the accident, but it changed his personality. So here it has things, a few of those things listed here. So before, he was well-mannered and soft-spoken. Then after the accident, because of the part of the brain that was impacted, he started behaving in odd ways, saying inappropriate things, those types of things. So look up that story if you haven't done so already. All right, and here's a little bit more about Phineas Gage and exactly what he endured. Okay. All right, the parietal lobe involved in processing various sensory and perceptual information. So the somasensory cortex is essential for processing sensory information from across the body, such as touch, temperature, and pain. Okay, so touching something. All right, here we have the temporal lobe, associated with hearing, memory, emotion, and some aspects of language, located on the side of the head near the temples. It contains the auditory cortex, strip of cortex in the temporal lobe that is responsible for processing auditory information, so the things that you are hearing, so hearing me tell you about this. You have Wernicke's area, important for speech and comprehension. Damage to Wernicke's area results in difficulty understanding language. All right, so here, once again, you have Broca's and Wernicke's area. Damage to either Broca's area or Wernicke's area can result in language deficits. The types of deficits are different, but it also depends on the area. All right, so this is the occipital lobe. It is associated with visual processing. All right, so for you to be able to view this video and see the things that are on your screen, it's coming from back here. All right. The thalamus serves as the relay center of the brain, where most senses, excluding smell, are routed before being directed to the other areas of the brain for processing. You have the limbic system. The limbic system is involved in mediating emotional response and memory. It is made up of a number of different structures, some of the most important ones being the amygdala, which is our experience of emotion and tying emotional meaning to our memories. You have the hippocampus, the structure associated with learning and memory. And you have the hypothalamus. This regulates the homeostatic processes, including body temperature, appetite, and blood pressure. All right, so the limbic system is involved in mediating those emotional responses and memory. All right, the midbrain, you have the reticular formation, is important in regulating the sleep-wake cycle, arousal, alertness, and motor activity. So there could be damage in this area for someone, for example, that has narcolepsy. All right. The substantia nigra, which is where dopamine is produced, is involved in control of movement. Then we have the VTA, which is ventricular area, which is where dopamine is produced, associated with mood, reward, and addiction. And so if you look at this particular area, then you have essentially some of the issues that we're seeing or that are seen with Parkinson's disease. Okay, so the impact of this midbrain area. All right, the hindbrain, we have the medulla. When you were a kid, you might have heard the term medulla oblongata when somebody was telling you to make sure that you are using your brain. Medulla controls automated processes like breathing, blood pressure, and heart rate. You have pons, which connects the brain and the spinal cord, is involved in regulating brain activity during sleep. And you have the cerebellum, controls our balance, coordination, movement, and motor skills, and it is thought to be important in processing some types of memory. Okay, so these structures combined are known as the brain stem. Right, so right down in here. All right. Brain imaging. So if you were having some type of an issue, you would likely go through some type of brain imaging. And depending upon what issue it was, they would refer you for whichever specific type of imaging. So here we have some that involve radiation, which are a CT scan and a PET scan. You might have heard it referred to as a PET scan. Techniques involving magnetic fields, such as an MRI and an fMRI, and techniques involving electrical activity, for example, an EEG. So a CT scan involves X-rays and creates an image through X-rays passing through various densities within the brain. A CT scan can be used to show brain tumors. Then you have the PET scan or the PET scan. It's helpful for showing activity in different parts of the brain. This involves injecting individuals with a mildly radioactive substance and monitoring changes in blood flow to different regions of the brain. A PET scan is helpful for showing activity in different parts of the brain. Okay, so perhaps they believe something might be going on by way of some type of disorder or disease that they need to diagnose by seeing if a particular part of the brain lights up that others don't. An MRI uses magnetic fields to produce a picture of the tissue being imaged, and a fMRI, which is a functional form of MRI, shows changes in metabolic activity over time. All right, an EEG. At some point, you've probably seen something where they have these little electrodes on top of the scalp in which they're trying to receive data based on activity that a person is performing. Okay, so using caps with electrodes, modern EEG research can study the precise timing of overall brain activities by tracking amplitude and frequency of brain waves. All right, so here we're going to just touch base on the endocrine system. This is a series of glands that produce hormones to regulate the body's regulate normal body functions. The hypothalamus links the nervous system and the endocrine system by controlling the pituitary gland. Okay, so the pituitary gland serves as the master gland, controlling the secretions of all other glands. Right, so that's the main one. The thyroid secretes thyroxine, which regulates growth, metabolism, and appetite. So a lot of times you will hear someone say that they have an overactive thyroid or some type of thyroid disorder. You have the adrenal gland, which secretes hormones involved in the stress response. You have the gonads secrete sex hormones, which are important for successful reproduction and regulate sexual motivation and behavior. And you have the pancreas secretes hormones that regulate blood sugar. All right, so here's a little bit more of the breakdown of the endocrine system and what it looks like. The major glands are all shown here for you. So make sure you just kind of go through and touch base on this as to what everything looks like, especially if you're going into any medical fields. All right, neurotransmitters and how they affect behavior. So here you have a few neurotransmitters, once again, that are listed, what they're involved in, and their potential effect on behavior. All right, so dopamine is one that's very popular that you hear quite often. That one has to do with mood, sleep, and learning. Potential effect on behavior, it could be increased pleasure or suppressed appetite. Okay, so just kind of looking at how those neurotransmitters work help one to understand what a person might be going through should they say my dopamine levels are off or my serotonin levels are off, those types of things.